Imagine for a second that you're completely exhausted. It's been this long, grueling day. Your body is practically screaming for sleep, and you just need to lie down.
Right. We've all had those days.
Yeah, but imagine you can't close your eyes because the actual act of resting in a public space has just been made a criminal offense. So you have to, like, calculate every single move you make.
Just to perform a basic biological function.
Exactly. Just to sleep without ending up in handcuffs.
It's a profound, honestly, almost unimaginable level of hypervigilance to operate under. And I mean, that is the daily waking reality for thousands of people right now.
It really is. And before we get into exactly how that reality came to be, I do want to give a massive welcome to all of our new subscribers joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you here for this conversation.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone.
Today, we're looking at this really complex stack of sources centered on Kentucky. We've got new state legislation, specifically the Safer Kentucky Act, alongside academic research on vehicular homelessness.
We've also got local news reports, actual shelter guidelines, and some really revealing local Reddit threads.
Yeah, the Reddit threads were wild. It gives this 360-degree view of a situation that is just fundamentally transforming American cities. Our goal with this exploration today is to impartially unpack how these new laws are reshaping the realities of homelessness.
Right. Looking at the lawmakers' intentions, the day-to-day survival strategies, and the systemic challenges.
And I want to be incredibly clear right up front because this is important. The sources we're looking at contain highly politically charged viewpoints from across the whole spectrum.
Very charged.
Yeah. We are absolutely not taking sides here. Our mission is just to objectively report the arguments and the realities in these texts so you, the listener, can get the full picture of what's actually happening on the ground.
And to really grasp what's happening on the streets, I mean, we first have to understand the mechanics of the law that now governs them.
Okay, so help me wrap my head around this. We're talking about House Bill 5, the Safer Kentucky Act. If I'm unhoused and I fall asleep on a park bench or pitch a tent under a bridge, what actually happens? Am I getting a warning ticket or am I leaving in a squad car?
Well, it really depends on how many times you've been caught. The law creates a specific new offense, KRS 511.110.
Okay.
And this formally defines and prohibits what they call unlawful camping. The statute basically says you're guilty if you knowingly enter or stay on a public or private street, a sidewalk, a bridge, underpass.
Basically anywhere not designated for sleeping.
Exactly. And the definition of camping is cast incredibly wide. It's tents and huts, sure, but it also includes using a sleeping bag, a cot, or even just a hammock in an undesignated area.
Wait, so just laying out a sleeping bag counts?
Yes. And a first offense is a violation, which means a mandatory court appearance and a fine of up to $250.
That's a lot of money for someone with nothing.
It is. But the penalties escalate rapidly. If you refuse to stop camping right then, or if you're cited a second time, it automatically bumps up to a Class B misdemeanor.
Oh, wow. What does that carry?
Up to 90 days in jail, plus the fine.
Up to 3 months in jail for a second offense of sleeping outside? That is, that's intense. And I noticed something in the sources about property owners, too.
Yeah, the law also amends state self-defense statutes, so it legally allows property owners to use physical force against someone unlawfully camping on their property. Right. Provided the camper was told to leave and threatened to use force against the owner first.
Okay, hold on, though. How does the Supreme Court justify states doing this? Like, if sleep is literally a biological necessity, how is punishing someone for doing it not considered cruel and unusual punishment if they have nowhere else to go?
Well, that is the exact legal argument that went all the way up to the Supreme Court last summer. It was a landmark case called City of Grants Pass v. Johnson.
Right, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, the court ruled 6-3 that municipal bans on public sleeping do not actually violate the Eighth Amendment.
What was the reasoning?
Basically, the majority argued that the Eighth Amendment protects against cruel methods of punishment, like torture, but it doesn't guarantee a right to housing. And it doesn't prevent a city from criminalizing specific acts, like, setting up a tent.
Even if the city doesn't have enough shelter beds.
Exactly. And that ruling effectively gave states like Kentucky the legal green light to enforce these really strict bans.
So if that's the legal framework, what is the logic from the state lawmakers who wrote this bill? Like, why take this specific, really punitive approach?
Well, impartially speaking, the proponents of the bill people, like Representative Jason Nemes, they frame this as a tough love approach.
Tough love.
Right. Their stated, on the record goal isn't just to fill up jails with unhoused people. They argue that the threat of arrest creates necessary friction.
Friction.
Yes.
Interesting word choice.
It is. The logic is that this legal friction will push individuals living on the streets into like substance abuse treatment programs or job training facilities. They want police to use the threat of a citation to direct people towards state-funded help.
Okay.
And proponents also point out that alongside this law, the state allocated a $10 million budget aimed specifically at addressing the underlying issues of homelessness.
Okay, I hear that logic. It essentially functions like a zero-tolerance attendance policy at a school, right?
It's a good way to look at it.
You create a consequence so severe that people have no choice but to engage with the system. You're using the law as a funnel to force people toward rehabilitation.
Right, that's the intention.
But, and this is my big question, if this law acts as a funnel, where is the bottom? Like, does Kentucky actually have the physical shelter beds to catch these people once they get pushed inside?
And that, according to the data, is the critical flaw in the mechanism. You can't push people indoors if the doors are locked. The 2025 K Count, which is the state's annual census of the homeless population, they located 5,789 unhoused people in Kentucky on a single night,
Wow.
which is a nearly 11% jump from just the previous year. And meanwhile, the National Alliance to End Homelessness estimates that Kentucky operates with a structural deficit of at least 1,300 emergency shelter beds.
A deficit of 1,300 beds. So that means even if every single unhoused person wanted to comply with the law, if they all walked to a shelter tonight to avoid arrest, 1,300 of them physically could not get inside.
Exactly. And it's actually worse than that because the beds that do exist aren't evenly distributed.
What do you mean?
Well, there are incredible programs operating in the state, like the Emergency Shelter of Northern Kentucky, or ESNKY. They operate what's called a low-barrier winter shelter.
When we say low barrier in this context, what does that actually mean for someone on the street?
It means it's a shelter that doesn't force you to, say, pass a breathalyzer or submit to a background check or attend a religious service just to get out of the freezing cold. Adults can just drop in to survive the night.
Oh, that's crucial.
It is. ESNKY also runs a higher barrier 247 housing work program for men who are employed and actively saving for market rate housing, which obviously requires more strict compliance.
Right. And the sources also highlighted mobile outreach, like the Hope Mobile in Lexington, right?
Yes.
They literally drive a custom medical vehicle to downtown churches, handing out food, basic wound care, and Narcan for overdose prevention right where people are.
And those programs do phenomenal work. But the reality is that these urban shelters are frequently operating at absolute maximum capacity. They're forced to turn people away nightly.
Heartbreaking.
And in many rural counties across Kentucky, there is zero emergency shelter infrastructure, like literally none.
So if the shelters are full or they just don't exist in your county, how is this intended friction actually playing out when police enforce the law?
The sources provide some deeply striking anecdotes on this. In Louisville, there was an incident involving a pregnant woman living under an overpass.
Oh.
She believed her water had just broken. A police lieutenant, Caleb Stewart, approached to clear the encampment. And despite her stating she was in labor and needed an ambulance, she was detained and cited for unlawful camping.
Wait, what? She was in active labor.
Yes. And the officer actually noted in his report that he was applying the friction the new law intended. She did, in fact, give birth later that day, and she's currently awaiting a trial date for the citation.
I am genuinely speechless. She is cited for camping while in active labor, all in the name of creating friction.
It's intense. And in rural Daviess County, police records show a different manifestation. A woman was cited for unlawful camping 8 times in a single month in the exact same spot.
8 times?
Yeah. She was living in a wood line next to a business with her 2 dogs. She had painstakingly built a shelter out of cardboard from a nearby dumpster. And she was repeatedly cited, just racking up violations, because she simply had nowhere else to go in that county.
I have to imagine homeless advocates are incredibly vocal about these outcomes.
Oh, they are. They fundamentally argue that criminalizing poverty doesn't solve it. They look at that $10 million state funding allocation as merely a down payment after decades of severe underinvestment in affordable housing.
That makes sense from their perspective.
Furthermore, they argue that citing people without offering a physical bed doesn't compel them to seek treatment. It just forces them to hide.
Right, because if they stay visible, they get arrested.
Exactly. And when unhoused populations retreat deeper into the shadows, it severely disrupts the ability of street outreach workers and medical professionals to locate them and offer services.
So if the urban shelters are completely full, rural counties have no shelters at all, and sleeping on a sidewalk gets you a Class B misdemeanor, where do people actually go? It seems like they're just being legally squeezed out of existence.
And this is where we see a massive structural shift in behavior. Unhoused Kentuckians are adapting by turning to the only private enclosed space they have left their vehicles.
Ah,
And there's a very specific legal reason they are choosing their cars.
because of the exemption in the Safer Kentucky Act, right?
Yes, the 12-hour rule. KRS 511.110 explicitly states that the law doesn't prevent a person from sleeping temporarily in their vehicle as long as it's lawfully parked on a public road or parking lot.
Okay.
But the sleeping and parking can only occur for a period of less than 12 consecutive hours.
Stop and think about the sheer logistics of that for a second. That is an exhausting, high-stakes game of vehicular musical chairs.
It really is.
How do you maintain any semblance of a normal life or try to keep a job when you are legally mandated to uproot your entire home twice every single day? Like, where do you even park for hours 13 through 24?
Navigating that requires an immense amount of strategic planning. We see this detailed heavily in the academic research on vehicular homelessness and in those local Reddit threads where vehicle dwellers share tactics.
Yeah, the Reddit stuff was fascinating.
The primary strategy they utilize is known as stealth.
Stealth car camping. What are the actual mechanics of being stealth?
Well, to avoid drawing attention from police, private security, or, neighborhood associations, stealth campers time their movements with absolute precision.
Okay.
They arrive at a parking location exactly at sundown, when visibility drops, and they leave exactly at sunrise. They construct custom-cut window covers using dark, non-reflective materials.
To completely black out the windows.
Exactly, so no one can see inside and no flashlight beam can penetrate. They also stress keeping the exterior of the vehicle impeccably clean, avoiding bumper stickers or clutter.
So the car just looks like it belongs to a local resident rather than someone living in it.
Precisely.
And the Reddit threads were incredibly specific about where they actually parked to pull this off.
Very specific. High-volume truck stops and interstate plazas like Pilot or Love's are popular because overnight parking is the norm there.
That makes sense.
However, campers note it's incredibly loud with idling semi-trucks making sleep difficult. 24-hour fitness centers, like Planet Fitness, are highly recommended. A cheap monthly membership gives you a relatively safe place to park and, crucially, access to hot showers and restrooms.
Oh, that's smart.
Cracker Barrel is also widely known in the community for being tolerant of overnight parkers in their lots.
But the community also maps out the danger zones, right? The places to actively avoid.
Yes, especially city parks like Tyler Park in Louisville. And this highlights a fascinating legal conflict. In late 2022, Louisville passed a municipal ordinance making it illegal to sleep in your car in a public park if officers suspect you are using it as a residence.
Wait, so you could be following the state's 12-hour rule perfectly, legally parked for only 8 hours, but still get cited and have your vehicle impounded by the city.
That is the exact trap. The local municipal ban can override the state exemption depending entirely on exactly where your tires are parked.
That is a logistical nightmare. And we haven't even touched on the physical dangers. A car is just a metal box. It has zero temperature regulation.
The environmental risks are severe, often fatal. In the winter, cars offer almost no insulation. To avoid freezing to death, people have to turn their cars on intermittently to run the heater.
But that's dangerous.
Very. If snow blocks the exhaust pipe or if there's a minor exhaust leak and they run it too long, they risk carbon monoxide poisoning.
And then the summers in Kentucky are brutally hot and humid.
Which brings up a terrifying legal bind for unhoused parents due to something called Bryan's Law.
What's that?
In Kentucky, a car's interior can reach 120 degrees in just 10 minutes on a summer day. Under Bryan's Law, leaving a child under 8 unattended in a vehicle in a way that poses a risk of death is a serious felony manslaughter or wanton endangerment.
Put yourself in the shoes of an unhoused parent living in a sedan. You need to run into a building to use the restroom, or grab a box of food from a pantry.
Exactly. You face an agonizing, impossible choice. Do you leave your child in the car with the AC running for 5 minutes and risk a felony manslaughter charge if a police officer happens to see them unattended?
Or do you take your child with you to loiter outside a public restroom, which immediately draws attention to your homelessness, risking a citation for unlawful camping or loitering?
There is no right answer. Every option is a potential criminal charge.
Wow. Now, I know the sources mention cities attempting to mitigate the weather with something called Operation White Flag.
Yeah, when the weather hits extreme, life-threatening levels specifically below freezing or above a 95-degree heat index, cities will declare a white flag emergency.
And what does that do?
During this period, shelters suspend their normal capacity rules and curfews. Cities will even waive zoning regulations so local churches can open their gymnasiums to get people inside.
Which is absolutely vital for saving lives in a blizzard, but it's ultimately just a temporary Band-Aid.
Complete.
The second the weather warms up to 35 degrees, the flag comes down, the churches have to close their gyms, and everyone is pushed right back out into their vehicles to play the 12-hour stealth game again.
And this constant state of movement, the sleep deprivation, and the looming threat of citation, it inevitably leads to a collision with the criminal justice system.
I am struggling to understand the logic of the financial penalties here. The state is essentially issuing a multi-thousand-dollar invoice to a person whose net worth is zero. How does the system rationally expect to collect that money?
Well, it doesn't, which is why it creates a revolving door. The sources outline a very specific cycle of debt.
Okay, walk me through that.
The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy details the mechanics perfectly. An unhoused person is cited for a second offense of unlawful camping. To avoid sitting in jail awaiting trial, they accept a plea deal.
Right.
That plea automatically comes with mandatory court costs of $140 and a fine of $250.
So right out of the gate, they owe almost $400.
Yes. Because they're unhoused and likely unemployed, they miss the payment deadline. They also miss the follow-up court date to explain to the judge why they can't pay.
Usually because they don't have a mailing address to receive the court summons, right?
Exactly. When they miss that date, the judge issues a bench warrant for their arrest. A week later, an officer spots them sleeping in a park, runs their name, sees the active warrant, and arrests them.
And the meter is still running while they're in custody?
Fast. That arrest adds booking fees and perhaps a 30-day jail sentence for the violation. When you calculate the initial fines, the court costs, the warrant fees, and the daily taxpayer cost of incarceration society has generated a receipt of over $2,300.
Over $2,000 to penalize a person who has absolutely nothing. And could, like, a local charity or a bail fund just step in, post their bail, so they don't lose whatever tenuous job or vehicle they might have while sitting in a cell?
Not under the new legislation. Another provision of the Safer Kentucky Act strictly prohibits charitable bail organizations from posting bail of $5,000 or more. This mechanism ensures that more impoverished individuals are kept in jail pretrial simply because they cannot afford to buy their release.
This entire system seems completely paralyzing. Are there any local judicial systems recognizing this and offering an alternative path?
There are diversionary attempts. Jefferson County, realizing their courts were becoming completely clogged with these minor citations, created a special homeless docket.
Okay, how does that work?
If an individual is cited for unlawful camping, they are directed to this specific courtroom. The judge will offer to dismiss the charges and waive the fines entirely if the individual engages with housing navigators, secures a state ID, or enters a treatment program.
That is essentially applying the friction the law intended, but providing an off-ramp before the debt cycle completely crushes them.
It is a pragmatic approach, but advocates consistently point out the structural flaw. Even if an individual does everything perfectly in that homeless docket, there still aren't enough affordable housing units to place them in once they graduate the program.
Which brings us to the core debate in the academic research provided. If friction and fines aren't solving the root issue, what does the evidence actually suggest works?
The research strongly highlights a model called Housing First, coupled with permanent supportive housing.
How does the mechanism of housing first differ from the tough love or treatment first model?
The traditional model mandates that people achieve sobriety or stabilize their mental health before they are deemed ready or worthy of permanent housing.
Right.
The Housing First model entirely flips that premise. It provides permanent, stable housing immediately without requiring prior substance abuse treatment or behavioral compliance as a prerequisite.
You just give them an unconditional lease.
Yeah.
From an outside perspective, that sounds risky.
Yeah.
Does the data actually back up that approach?
Overwhelmingly. Studies demonstrate that providing housing first actually results in individuals reporting significantly fewer psychiatric symptoms. Yeah. They utilize expensive emergency rooms far less and engage with preventative primary care more. The underlying theory is that when people have a stable foundation, a door that locks, and a bed that is theirs, They are far more capable of successfully engaging in addiction treatment.
And economically.
Economically, the evidence shows that the long-term savings to society achieved by drastically reducing jail time, ER visits, and court costs actually outweigh the upfront costs of subsidizing the housing.
So we are ultimately looking at two fundamentally opposed philosophies running straight into each other.
Yes.
One philosophy relies entirely on the punitive power of the legal system, using fines, friction, and the threat of a jail cell to force people toward rehabilitation. And the other philosophy argues that you have to provide a stable roof, a baseline of human security, before any real rehabilitation can even begin to take hold.
It is a profound ideological clash, and the consequences of that clash are currently playing out on the sidewalks, under the overpasses, and in the parking lots of Kentucky every single night.
To quickly recap the journey we've taken today, we've examined how legislative mandates like the Safer Kentucky Act, which criminalize the act of public sleeping, are colliding head-on with the logistical reality of massive structural shelter shortages.
And this collision is rapidly creating an invisible, highly stressed population of stealth car campers.
People who are forced to uproot their entire lives every 12 hours, all while navigating an unforgiving cycle of legal fees, bench warrants, and just impossible choices.
And it leaves us with a critical, foundational question to consider. As housing costs continue to dramatically outpace wages nationally, society is being forced to legally define who is allowed to simply exist in a public space.
Right.
If sleep is an inescapable biological necessity, but performing it in public is a criminal offense, where exactly is the baseline boundary of human rights in a modern American city?
That is a heavy but incredibly vital question to carry with us. Where do you go when resting is a crime? I want to thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. If you want to help keep these discussions going, check out the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store to pick up a cozy hoodie or buy us a coffee. It all helps support the channel.